Okay, it says the webinar is now broadcasting to all attendees, so I guess that's our cue. Hi, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Midtown Reader Bookstore in Tallahassee, I'm Sally Bradshaw. I'm thrilled you could join us today. We have been blessed as a bookstore in the last 3 years to have some terrific authors, everyone from James Patterson to Louise Penny. But I think I am most thrilled about this virtual event today. It is a substitute event for an event that was going to be held with Governor Jeb Bush and Jean Becker. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, here we are. But we've got the best of all worlds because now we're joined also by Jeb Bush Jr. and Pierce Bush. And so I'm just thrilled you have joined us today. We're going to be discussing Barbara Bush's book, Pearls of Wisdom. And this group is going to discuss it for you. They won't need a lot of facilitation. But I did want to mention that Midtown Reader is donating a percentage of all of our sales to the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, which was so important to Mrs. Bush. We're delighted to be able to support her continued literacy efforts. So if you're interested in purchasing it from us to make a donation to the foundation, you can go to midtownreader.com to do so. I also wanted to urge you to support independent bookstores right now. In the midst of this crazy time, these small, independent, and locally owned businesses are so important to communities. So you can get that book from any independent bookstore where you are in Florida or around the country, and I would urge you to support your independent bookstores. It is my treat to give a brief introduction to three people who need no introduction at all, starting with Jean Becker. Jean was President George H.W. Bush's chief of staff, the longest serving chief of staff, and a true friend to the Bush family. In fact, I think many times she was the glue that held all of the family and staff together and made it all work. She is a former journalist herself, and she was the deputy press secretary to Barbara Bush when Mrs. Bush was First Lady. I was a junior staffer in the White House. Jean was a senior staffer and taught me the meaning of kindness. She, in a political context, treated everyone the same, above her on the totem pole, below her on the totem pole. She is a terrific writer and was very instrumental in publishing this book, and all of her proceeds from this book are also going to the Bush Library. So Jean, welcome. I'm thrilled to be with you. I wish we were together in person. Jeb Bush Jr. and Pierce Bush also need no introductions. They are the grandsons of former First Lady Barbara Bush, and they are cousins, which makes them particularly fun to have in this webinar, but they're pretty impressive in their own right. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about both of them. Jeb Bush Jr. Is a partner in Jeb Bush & Associates, Stock Square Capital, and Bush Ventures. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Texas in Latin American Studies, and he also had got a master's in international real estate finance, which I didn't know until I read your biography. Very impressive, Jebby. Thought that was most impressive.
Thank you, Sally.
Forgive me for calling you that. I remember Jeb Jr. when he was wearing footy pajamas with his mom and dad on a campaign bus in 1990. So that ages me and him a little bit. He's also a board member of the Barbara Bush Foundation, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, Friends of St. Jude, where he generously donates his time to raise money for children at St. Jude's Children's Hospital in Memphis, and a board member of Habitat for Humanity in Miami. And he and his beautiful wife, Sandra, have two beautiful daughters who are great readers. So I hope we get a chance to talk about that, Jeb. And then last but never least is Pierce Bush, who is the CEO of Big Brothers and Big Sisters Lone Star, which is the largest Big Brother and Big Sister affiliate in the country, which I did not know. I love Pierce's story about Big Brothers and Big Sisters because he had a career in finance. Pierce, you went to UT as well, BA in American Studies from UT Austin, but he started out in finance. And after volunteering at Big Brothers and Big Sisters, got involved and eventually became their CEO, and they are wildly successful. And I think his involvement in Big Brother and Sisters is so representative of the service that George and Barbara Bush represent to so many Americans. It's really something to see. But most importantly, he and his lovely wife, Sarah Beth, have a fabulous and famous golden retriever. And being a golden retriever owner myself, I have to tell you that Winston Moose is really someone to follow. So you guys make sure and track down Winston Moose, and we intend to hear more about that. I'm not going to say anything about Pearls of Wisdom. I'm going to let Jean introduce that. But Jean, I did wear my cheap dime store pearls to represent for the title of the book.
Pearl earrings.
So perfect. So we are going to let you take it away. And thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Sally, I love that you invited us to do this, but I am so sad because I am supposed to be in Tallahassee today with the governor. And I want all the viewers to know that Sally Bradshaw was my chief of staff soulmate. We, I don't know how many times we would have secret conversations behind the Bush family back. I guess it's not so secret anymore, but Sally was just a great mentor to me and truly one of my favorite people in the world. So thank you for inviting us today. And I hope the governor is not watching. I don't think he is, because as forward as I was looking to doing this event with him in Tallahassee this evening, it's possible we traded up, because Pierce and Jeb are among the more entertaining of the grandkids. Yes, they're among my favorite, of course, but they're also highly entertaining. So I think they will, this is going to be a lot of fun today. Before I talk about Pearls of Wisdom, I do have a slight programming note, Sally. This is the fourth one of these that I've done, and all the others for Kansas City Public Library, the George and Barbara Bush Foundation, a couple others, and all the others were during happy hour in the evening, and we played a drinking game where because everybody had their wine or their beer, and every time we said a certain word like Ganny, people were invited to take a drink. Well, there are some people who are tuning in today who tuned into the others. They're very upset we're not playing a drinking game. People, it's noon on the East Coast. I know it's Friday. It's 11 a.m. in Texas. I know it's Friday. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, but I don't think we should play a drinking game. So get over it. I've been getting a lot of emails this morning. And I hate to be tough, but I feel this needed to be said. Okay, let's talk about Pearls. Pearls of Wisdom was a book that has been in my heart for a long time. And when you read the book, if you haven't read it yet, you will learn that Barbara Bush was perhaps one of the bossiest people who ever lived. And I say that in a loving way. We all learned so much from her. But a lot of people have asked me how on earth she managed to write a book after she died. Well, it wasn't exactly a miracle. She maybe had a little help from a ghostwriter. That would be me. But the truth is, Barbara Bush spent her whole life writing this book, because what it is a collection of what we call her Pearls of Wisdom, all the advice that she gave out over the years. And it's her voice that you're going to hear in this book when you read it. And it's actually her voice you're going to hear right now, because we have a video that we would like to play for you.
One night, I absolutely couldn't sleep and found myself thinking about what I've learned in life, sometimes the hard way. Try to find the good in people and not the bad. Isn't it better to make a friend than an enemy? Do not buy what you cannot afford. Don't try to live up to your neighbors, and be sure you pay people back. Value your friends, and remember that loyalty is a two-way street. Love your children. Don't worry that your children never listen to you. Worry that they're always watching you.
Those human connections with spouses, with children, with friends are the most important investment you will ever make.
That you really shouldn't take yourself or life too seriously. Someone once said there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those that wake up in the morning and say, "Good morning, Lord." And there are others who wake up and say, "Good Lord, it's morning." Make sure you're the former and not the latter. None of us are the same. None of us are perfect. But it's our cracks and flaws that make our lives together so very interesting.
Fathers and mothers, if you have children, they must come first. You must read to your children, and you must hug your children, and you must love your children. Your success as a family, our success as a society, depends not on what happens in the White House, but on what happens inside your house. Somewhere out in this audience may even be someone who will one day follow in my footsteps and preside over the White House as the president's spouse, and I wish him well.
I still believe that if more people could read, write, and comprehend, we could solve so many of our problems. The parents we've met are determined to teach their children integrity, strength, responsibility, courage, sharing, love of God, and pride in being an American. Remember, at the end of your life, you will never regret not having passed one more test, not winning one more verdict, or closing one more deal. You will regret time not spent with a spouse, a child, a parent, or a friend. No matter what our problems, we can always find people who are worse off than we are. Help them and forget self. And above all, seek God. There is absolutely no downside.
Okay, so before I turn it over to Jeb and Pierce, I'm going to read just a very short passage from Prosa Wisdom. It's from a speech that Mrs. Bush gave to a group of students. She loved putting this in her speeches, and we would update it over the years. But she knew she was bossy, and here was her excuse. Now, I can't give you any advice on how to be a good teacher or a writer or a scientist or an actor or a dancer. I especially can't give you advice on dancing. But at this point in my life, I can share with you some ideas on how to survive the inevitable ups and downs. After all, in 80 years of living, I have survived 6 children, 17 grandchildren, 6 wars, big election day wins, and big election day losses, and 61 years of marriage to a husband who keeps jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. So it's just possible along the way I've learned a thing or two. So I would love now to turn this over to 2 of those 17 grandchildren that she managed to survive. Pierce, why don't you go first? You're the out-of-stater here. We'll let the out-of-stater go first and then the Floridian go next. First of all, I would love you to just tell us a little more about how you and Sarah Beth are surviving the pandemic and what else, anything else going on in your life, and then talk about your Ganny.
Sure. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Sally, for organizing this. I'm really excited to be here, first of all, and glad that so many people are able to join, and hopefully everybody's healthy and their families are doing well during this time. We are very fortunate, Jean, Sarah Beth, and I, and Winston Moose, who, Sally, thank you for the shout out. If you're curious, Winston Moose is on Instagram and has like 100,000 followers organically because of my wife's doing. So Winston is our little family's mascot. We are very fortunate to have a nice house and be very healthy. And it's been really a peaceful past couple of weeks, especially coming off the tail end of a very brief but very aggressive. I jumped in on the last day you could file, and when I ran for Congress. So it's weird almost to go to something that was the most extroverted type of event you could possibly participate in for 2 months, essentially, because after Christmas and into March 3rd was not successful, but very grateful to be back at Big Brothers Big Sisters. The agency gave me a partial leave of absence to do this. And I always knew that the first part was going to be the hardest part for me. And so I'm really grateful to be back at Big Brothers Big Sisters. Of course, the whole world changed right when I got back in early March because of the pandemic. And so our organization, our mission continues. We've luckily already had some, I hate using the word, but I'll use it, some e-mentoring platforms. And we've transitioned a lot of our matches from site-based and school-based in-person interactions to those platforms. And the rest of our mission has been able to adapt. So we're doing interviews and all these things over Zoom, which, I for one miss in-person connectivity, and I'm anxious to go back. And I'm hopeful that our society doesn't change too much because of this, because I don't think you can replace the power of being in person. So enough about me. I'm very grateful to be back in a job that I love, that really makes a difference, that in an agency that covers a lot of Texas. But we're here to talk about about Ganny. And first of all, I love that video and hearing her voice. I think about this often. She passed away, what was it, 2 years ago, almost, just a little over 2 years ago. And, I was fortunate to grow up in Houston, and I moved here in 1991. They moved back in 1993, of course. And so got to spend a lot of my life with her. And I can still hear her voice so clearly, Jean, just in my ear. And, occasionally when I do something, Ganny had an omnipresence about her. Jebby could certainly attest to this. There are times in Maine where we'd maybe be doing something that we shouldn't be doing, and Ganny would just have a way of popping up. And so because I can still hear her voice, I always feel like she's always watching and kind of always there and quick to share her pearls of wisdom, because again, I can call on them so clearly. When I listened to that video, by the way, one thing jumped out at me that I haven't thought about really, and that was her lesson, or her wisdom, her pearl, to not take yourself too seriously. And the truth is, being a grandson of Barbara Bush, it was hard to not take her seriously. In fact, I would say as a young kid, so I'll go and say, I wish I almost had heard her say that and I'd applied that to her lessons, because whenever she, I don't want to say dictate, but we called her the enforcer. So I'll say, whenever she would dictate her wisdom, it was stuff that we really, really took seriously. And she had a way of testing logic at a very young age. For example, my sister Lauren decided she was going to become a vegetarian, and Lauren had these leather boat shoes, and she was like 5 maybe, and she decided she didn't want to be a vegetarian. Ganny, of course, dug into why. She said because animals have faces, and Lauren didn't make the connection that her shoes, which were leather, happened to be made from animals. And so Ganny laid into Lauren, and just she had that ability to kind of always play with logic, and it really shaped who we all are as her grandkids. I always say, and I'll pass it to Jebby, but I believe that without Barbara Bush, you would certainly not have a President George H.W. Bush. There's no way you'd have a President George W. Bush. And I don't think you'd have a bunch of kids and grandkids that believe life should be dedicated to something bigger than themselves. And it's almost single-handedly. Yes, Gampy was an amazing leader and had an ability to kind of lead through example. But my grandmother, and she was not Sicilian, but she was like that Sicilian grandmother that had a tough love style to her. And thank God for it. We're all better because of it. I mean, everybody that was around her, even though the lessons were sometimes hard to swallow, they made you a better person. And so I will always be grateful for the fact that I can hear her voice. Her pearls are still stuck in my head. And Jean, I'm grateful that you've captured this book, because she was one of the most wise women of her time. And it captures so beautifully that voice that I can hear clearly still. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Pierce. And Pierce, before we turn it over to Jeb, I just want to say one thing about your race for Congress. You've heard me say this before. Every person in your family who ever ran for office, with the exception of George P. Bush, the current land commissioner of Texas, but your grandfather, the 43rd president, the governor of Texas, they all lost their first race when they ran. The first time they ran, they lost. So it's sort of, you could say it's sort of a good beginning. We were a little worried. We were a little worried when George P. won his first race. This was not family tradition.
Actually,
Okay,
also Prescott,
what?
Great Gampy lost his.
Your great-grandfather lost. That's right. Your great-grandfather lost his too. So you're on the right track. You're on the right track. Jeb. Over to you, Jeb.
Yeah, I mean, well said, Pierce. I think to echo kind of Pierce's feelings of this looming presence of Barbara Bush over us. It's something that is kind of a running joke amongst the family. As you might be able to see in my Zoom camera, literally do have Barbara Bush over my head of 10 jokes that she has. But we miss her a lot. I was very blessed and fortunate. From about the age of 8 till 18, I got to live up or spend the summers up in Kennebunkport with them. It was a time where both my grandparents were, I guess, maybe put to retirement a little sooner than expected. It was also the time that my parents were starting to get involved in politics, with Dad running for the first time in '94, and Pierce, someone else who lost their first race as well, but came back and bounced back very strong. But I was able to go up and spend a lot of time with Barbara Bush, and I think Pierce was trying to be polite a little bit, but we were on the receiving end of a lot of disciplinary actions, is one way to say it. We would, amongst 21 cousins or her grandkids, we had a lot of fun, but we also would get into trouble from time to time. And, my grandfather was kind of a softie in the sense of, he didn't feel like he knew Barbara Bush was going to step in and do the discipline and put us in line. And she did that. It took us, some more than others, a few more years than others, but most of us got there. So very blessed to have Barbara Bush in our life.
Okay, I just want to say that these two are skirting a little bit the fact that they got in trouble a lot with their grandmother because they were very adventuresome, high energy young people. They look very grown up now. I'm calling them the bearded ones. And by the way, your grandmother would not like the beard, but it is what it is. I think you both
on the
look good.
record. On the record.
On the record. But I'm going to read from the book from a speech she gave one fall, right after the whole family had spent a lot of time in Kennebunkport that summer. And this is what she said about having teenagers in the house. She said to her audience, "Maybe I can help prevent you from making some of the mistakes we made with our grandchildren. Be careful of criticizing their clothes. What they change into could be tighter and shorter than what you made them take off." I'm thinking that was not either one of you, but we can talk about that. If you have a lot of tension and you get a headache, do what it says on the aspirin bottle. Take 2 aspirin and keep away from children. You can't hide a piece of broccoli and a glass of milk. That would be funny if I were talking about a grandchild. Of course, she's talking about your Gampy. Don't lend your car to anyone you gave birth to or their offspring. I'm looking at you, Pierce. If you remain calm, you just don't have all the facts. So Jeb and Pierce, I would love for you, maybe for the first time in public, on the internet, to talk about getting in trouble. What do you remember as being the biggest trouble you ever got into with your grandmother? And I'm thinking at least once you got in trouble together.
Is this being recorded, or is this my parents watching this? Or good.
Sally, just say no. No, it's not being recorded.
It's not. No.
Yeah.
It's really hard to pinpoint one thing, Jean, because I feel like we got in trouble a lot for what it's worth. What year was that written, by the way? That excerpt you just read?
Hold on. I can look that up for you. That was written in 2003.
Yeah,
that
was one of those things. I wish I had read that letter or memorized it more, because I, in about 2008, took her car without asking, and and she had just had double knee surgery. And so I thought I was doing a service by not waking her up and I thought I was also doing a service by taking our younger cousin Robert to the newest Batman movie and Dairy Queen. And I remember getting a call on my cell phone from my dad after the movie, where the Dairy Queen line, and I thought he was calling to say what a great act of service to take our younger cousin Robert out, for a cousin outing. And he said, "Where are you? Where's the smart car? Ganny's pissed." And so we came back, and you know, there was a guest from Houston who was up, you know, visiting, and I had never met this person. Of course, I was just graduated from college, moving back to Houston. And she gave me a dressing down in front of this. It was like, "Nice to meet you." And then Ganny was there. And, you know, that's a silly thing because there are other examples, but she was really mad. And I think part of it was the pain from the knee surgery. So I'm giving her that as a reason. But as Jebby pointed out earlier, not on this call, but before, you know, Ganny called Jebby and me the screamers. So she took a special kind of medal for correcting Jebby and me through life, because she did not tolerate quote unquote screamers very well. So,
well, just Pierce brings up a pretty incredible story of just the toughness of Barbara Bush, which was, I think it was during the Beijing Olympics, might have been 2008, for the double knee surgery. She opted to have both her knees replaced at the same time, which the doctors didn't really suggest that. And I think, you know, Pierce and I can't believe you're blaming the knees though, Pierce. That's unbelievable. But, you know, I think it was maybe like 3 days later, she was walking around, and I think by the end of the week, she was back in the pool swimming her laps after having 2 knees replaced, which is just, I mean, brutal in terms of the pain and just the toughness that she had to recover as quickly as possible, so she could just be, I guess, running around the point and, you know, barking at her grandkids.
Okay, but Jeb, we're not going to let you off the hook. You have to tell us something specific you did that really annoyed your grandmother.
So the thing, I honestly, I'm not, you know, just because of being on the board of the Barbara Bush Family Literacy Foundation, using this story, because there was a lot of instances, as Pierce described. But when I was kind of spending the whole summer up there, you know, I had to really focus on my summer reading. I wasn't always the best student, and I wasn't very, you know, disciplined. And it took probably 2 or 3 summers where Ganny had to really lay into me and sit me down to get me to do my summer reading. Now, you know, fast forward to now, I'm 36 years old and have a passion, love to read. But she used to really just, you know, and she did it with all the grandkids in terms of making, you know, the importance of summer reading. But to Pierce's point, she would get in your face and sit you down and say, "Jebby, have you done your summer reading? If not, you're not going anywhere." And she had that kind of discipline for all of us.
Yeah, she would make us read out loud. I remember reading Slaughterhouse 5, Kurt Vonnegut's book, to her out loud, because it would not just be go read in the corner. She was kind of a trust and verify, and the verify part of it was you read out loud to actually prove that you're reading.
So I'm curious, who would win out? If your grandfather loved to go out on the boat with both of you, you two are among few of the grandkids who learned how to drive his boat. He didn't let just anyone drive his boat, and you two were 2 of them. And he loved to go on the boat with you all. Jeb, you were definitely one of his big fishing partners. So was there ever a tug of war where your grandfather wanted to go fishing and boating, but your grandmother felt that you should not be allowed to go because, I hate to use this word now, but you were sort of in quarantine?
Jebby, do you remember anything like that? I will say this. Again, Jean, we've all kind of alluded to this. You pointed it out. Gampy was just, I never remember Gampy, our grandfather, being angry or being, you know, it wasn't, you could tell when he was disappointed. He'd give a look, but there was never a lashing, so to speak, never a force of words that came with it. And I think it was her last letter she wrote, and I don't think she finished it. But she said one of her biggest regrets was being in a marriage where she was just the disciplinarian and he was just the have fun guy. And so she encouraged her in-laws not to, and my wife points that out. I mean, we don't have kids yet, and hopefully we'll maybe have some soon, but to our dog. She's like, nope, I can already tell you're trying to be like your grandfather, where I have to, scold the dog for some activity. I always get to be the guy that gives him the treats and stuff. So take that for what it's worth. I remember that. Jebby, specific memories about
I think she, one thing that maybe really annoyed Ganny a lot was that she had a very low tolerance for people that sat around and complained or whined or just were lazy or she just was not like cool with that. And she showed by example, I think, through leadership. One that pops to my head is with technology. I mean, she was always embracing iPads, emails, Blackberries, and having a 85 or even 92-year-old grandmother that was curious about Instagram and how to kind of advance on things shows that never kind of stop moving forward. So to kind of tie that back to your point with Gampy, he was a guy that just kind of lived life to the fullest. We went fishing at 5 a.m. We'd be back done with breakfast at 6, ready to go golfing after that. And so I think Ganny really appreciated that. I think she liked seeing us kind of run around the boat and fish on the rocks or going, golfing, or doing their summer reading. But to make sure that we weren't just kind of sitting around, watching TV, complaining about something.
Hey, Sally, I know you had some questions for us, and the three of us could tell stories forever. But why don't you jump in with your questions?
Well, I have gotten a
time.
lot of questions from a lot of the participants in the panel who sent some terrific questions, and I'm going to go through a few of those. But first, I just wanted to ask, what advice do you guys think she would have given us in the midst of a pandemic? I mean, besides obviously to have a good book. You don't get a pass and get to give that easy answer. I know she would have told us to read, but what advice would she have given us in the midst of this crazy time we're in?
Well, I'll jump in here. I've been asked this a lot, and so I'm ready to answer this question. But I love that either Pierce or Jeb, I think it was Pierce, just brought up the fact she did not like whiny people. She did not like woe is me and complainers. So she definitely would not. She would be very empathetic with people whose lives have truly been affected, who've been sick, who have lost loved ones, who have lost their jobs and are struggling financially. I know she would be worried about them and feel a lot of empathy. But for people who can't get their hair cut or can't get their nails done, or they're sick of sitting at home watching Netflix, she would have absolutely none of that. And I don't want to go on too long here, but the first time I was asked this, I thought about the speeches she gave after 9/11, and I looked them up to see if there was any relevancy there. And there were a couple of things that definitely jumped out at the page at me that was so true then after 9/11 and is so true now. So I'm just going to read a couple of those points. And what's interesting, she gave this speech, she actually gave the speech in 2002. So it was about a year after 9/11, but the country was still reeling. And she says, what I'd really like to do today is share some of the things I think I've learned in life. You could call them pearls of wisdom. So now you know where I got the title of the book from. The first point she made is so true today. There's always something to be thankful for if you take the time to look for it. Unfortunately, it seems to me that especially in these uncertain times, people are always looking for the bad and never the good. There are very few situations, no matter how sad or tragic, where most of us can't find something to be grateful for friends and family, for our country, for our faith. It's such a waste of energy to dwell on the bad and not rejoice in the good. I mean, how true is that today for all of us who want to dwell on woe is me? And the only other thing there were 10 points in this speech. I'm only going to do one more. Learn not to waste time. I don't know about the three of you, but I've wasted a lot of time in the last 6 weeks and trying to get better. She says that doesn't mean you have to work and play hard every single minute. Enjoying a good book, taking a nap on the back porch, watching it rain. That's all time well spent. Staying angry at a friend, worrying about things you can't change, watching reruns on television, those are precious moments lost. She's wrong on the reruns thing. I mean, let's face it, TV is what started getting us through this, but otherwise, what she said then just really strikes a chord today. You have to look for the good in every situation. Boys, do you have anything to add to that about your Ganny?
Go ahead, Pierce. Or
No, you go ahead, Jim.
so the thing that pops to mind, I totally agree, Jean. I think she would be, making sure that we, focus on really what's important, and we've been all forced to do that now because of this COVID-19. There's a point in the book which I believe it's George W. writes about Ganny and her, taking walks on the beach, which I think is super beautiful. And if you don't have your copy yet of the Pearls of Wisdom, I highly suggest picking it up. But he talks about how Ganny, especially towards the kind of later, the last couple of years of her life, she would get up every morning and walk the dogs on the beach. And she did that every morning religiously, and she just absolutely loved it. And, just taking advantage of every moment and to pause and reflect and appreciate it, which I think she did by example.
Yeah, just to add, I've been thinking about something she told me and then requested, and it came true for her. And it's a sad paradox for what a lot of people are maybe going through, Jean. But in around, 2010, she had a friend that was dying, and they would go visit him in the hospital. He had a form of aggressive pancreatic cancer, and it was a person with a big family. And I remember being in the car with her in Gampy, and she said, when it's our time to go, we're going to be surrounded by family. And that's like, and to me, I think the most horrifying part about this is so many people are passing. I mean, this is such a dark note to take this on, but you go to the hospital and people aren't even able to say goodbye, and then they're not able to mourn. And, I think back to Ganny saying that and how critical it is to value and spend quality time with, obviously, the people that you are closest to. And just, it's such a terrible paradox for me, because Ganny did go out with, a wave of her family, always with her friends, holding her hand. I mean, in typical Barbara Bush fashion, she kind of called her shot and told everybody one night that she was going to go, which I know this is such a dark corner to turn this down, but she said goodbye, and she said, and Gampy said, "Where are you going?" And she said, I'm going to die." And it was such a weird moment. And Doro, my aunt, was there, and I'll never forget that the next night she was staying in a room next to her, and she could hear. Ganny woke up, the next morning, she was still there, said, "Hello, hello." Somebody bring me coffee. Anyways, but the point of the story was, to value family during this time. I think she would have loved some of the pause, to spend just quality time with family, do puzzles. She was such a puzzle master. And so certainly not to whine if you didn't have any of these health conditions affecting you, and just really appreciate the kind of the slow moment.
Yeah, and to know that we're going to get through
in life, is what I would be all.
I love, can I mention one?
Oh, go ahead, Sally.
Hear me, Jean? I was just going to say, I love what Pierce said and Jeb about setting an example, because one of the things I was reminded of in reading this book is, we all know her for her work on literacy, certainly. It was a big cause, and it was a part of who she was and remained a part of who she was until the end. But she was able, without even saying a word, to send signals. I can remember there was a big controversy, and this is mentioned in the book, about people complaining about the Salvation Army ringing a bell at Christmas time at grocery stores and having people contribute to the Red Kettle. And she made a very conscious decision not to talk about it, just to go contribute to the Red Kettle at a grocery store, I think in maybe Virginia. She held, a baby that was suffering from HIV/AIDS and set such an amazing example about compassion and caring for others. And I found that sort of beautifully shown in this book, that there was a side of her where she led, like so many Bushes, by example, and she never had to say anything. Jean, give me an example of that that you can recall from your days of working with her.
Um, both President and Mrs. Bush were amazing in that way. I learned so much from watching them. They were doers. They didn't, President Bush used to make fun of, everybody wants to get a committee together and talk about it. And they both were just amazing. Your Salvation Army example is one of my favorite. And that she was First Lady of the United States and read in the Washington Post one morning. It was actually the malls in DC were going to kick out the Salvation Army red kettles because they thought they were disruptive to the shoppers. Well, she asked her press office. I happened to answer the phone when she called the press office, and she says, "Find a mall that has a red kettle, get the press, and meet me there in 2 hours." And so we found a mall in DC that still had a red kettle. And the presses, we got together a press pool, and they're like, "What is this all about?" I'm like, wait for it. But you're right, Sally. She didn't have to say a word. The First Lady of the United States came sweeping into this mall. The thing I will always remember is she put $11 in the kettle. And I remember thinking, you didn't have a 20? I mean, the $11 was just a little odd. But even, through their whole life, and one of my favorite President Bush stories is when a Secret Service agent's little boy, his 3-year-old, had leukemia, and his dad shaved his head to support his son who lost all his hair. So then President Bush's entire Secret Service detail decided to shave their heads to support their coworker. So President Bush shaved his head. And that picture went viral of a bald George Bush holding the bald little 3-year-old Patrick. It was on the big screen in Times Square on the Jumbotron. And again, it just sent a message of love and support. And they both were unbelievable in doing that. And they definitely both believed that action spoke louder than words. And I learned a lot from them and how they did that.
I love that. I had a question for Pierce. It's interesting to me, Pierce, because you're so involved. Well, you and Jeb Jr. both, and Jean, and so many nonprofits and so many causes. But some of our readers are big fans of the late Mary Higgins Clark. And she actually, one of the things that's interesting in the book to me is that Jean asked friends of the Bushes to actually write about their memories of your grandmother. And Mary Higgins Clark, who was involved, I guess, in the Bush Literacy Foundation, and they became friends that way, talks about how impossible it is to think of Barbara Bush in the past tense. And I think that's just such a lovely thing for someone to say. It is impossible to think of your grandmother in the past tense. How often do you see something, Pierce, and then maybe Jeb, that reminds you of her, that reminds you of a pearl of wisdom, that reminds you of something specific to advice she gave, action she took, something funny she said, because she had a killer sense of humor. And sometimes it was very hard to know whether she was serious or not. I was the victim of that on several occasions. So how often is that, do you sense that it's hard to think of her in the past tense?
And sorry, Sally, my computer might be getting a little slow, so the last part of your question lagged. But can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
I hear her voice every single day. It was just such a distinct voice. And it's hard to forget it. And I love that quote because I can hear the tone and the she just always had something to say. She never, in fact, later years, I would go to there, and Jean knows this room well, as does Jebby, but at their house, there was it was a very small room, a small den. And I'd go in the afternoons after work, typically after dinner. My grandparents lived across the street from my dad, so it was actually fun because I could go stop in and say hey to both. And we'd walk in there, and Gampy would not say a word typically, and Gandy would talk the entire time. And so she made it very hard for me not to hear her voice. But she was funny. She always had interesting observations, and she was just so candid. There was not the thing that I think strikes out to me is what you saw is what you got with her, publicly and privately. She couldn't help herself. In fact, as she got older, she never had much of a filter, but the filter continued to just disappear. And and so you had this just pure level of authenticity. And I remember, this is just a funny story, but when she had surgery once, again, I lived in Houston, so I was able to kind of always show up with my dad and be there for her, especially in moments, because I'd heard her say, I want to be surrounded by family. So I always took that seriously. She had, I think this is when she had the pig valve, Jean, if you remember that.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And I remember showing up post-surgery, and she was on, this was actually probably one of the best days of my life, because I was finally validated by my grandmother. My grandmother was never quick to those that she loved. She was never quick to compliment them to their face, but she always, I heard, compliment behind their back, okay? And be very defensive, but never to the face, very tough love. So she was on drugs in the operating room, and she was saying hilarious things. And I remember she said, somehow, my dad was like, Pierce is here. And she was like, Pierce is the best. I just love Pierce so much. And I was like, and by the way, she was not saying nice things about everybody, just to be clear. But I was like, yeah. So she actually does, which maybe I always knew, but it was nice to hear it with the truth serum of the post-operating room. So yeah, I hear her voice all the time. I think about it in moments where, some of the things on the campaign, I'm like, oh, Gaiety would not like that I have to say this or that I am saying it. And so I regret and I miss a lot the fact that I could go and get her candid opinion, because you would never not get it when you went to see her. I mean, I really miss it. It was always authentic and typically pretty right on, in my opinion.
Trying to pull up a picture here, but that's my I'm probably like 2-year-old, maybe 1-year-old Georgia. But if you could see, my grandmother was reading to her, and to answer your question, Sally, I think it's impossible not to hear her. I mean, both my grandparents were just such large presence, but especially now as we're home and we're all doing, those who have kids are basically teaching. There are teaching 2 kids in our case, and just it's really one of the core issues with the Barbara Bush Foundation is having folks that having adults and parents that could help read to their children and educate them. Child's first teacher is always the parent, and so that's something we're doing a lot with the Barbara Bush Foundation. But as watching, having 2 little kids of my own, and trying to help them with their reading reminds me of grandmother every single day.
Sally, do we have time for me to tell a quick story? Oops, Sally's on mute.
Sounds like a yes.
Yes, that's a yes.
A quick story, okay. So Pierce mentioned that Mrs. Bush had a pig valve, literally the valve of a pig's heart, put in to ease some serious heart condition she was having. It was a very scary time for her husband, who was very upset. But then she had the surgery, she had the pig valve put in, and a couple weeks later, the Bushes hosted the annual celebration of reading here in Houston. That was the fundraiser they did several times a year to raise money for a literacy foundation. And President Bush had the idea that we should highlight his wife's new pig valve. And he asked me to find a pig that he could bring onto stage. President Bush it scared me to death, honestly, when he walked in my office and said, Jean, I have an idea. Because sometimes the most bizarre, outrageous, huge things would come out of his mouth. Well, this was one of those days where he says, Jean, I have a great idea. Let's find a pig, and we'll say that this pig is the relative of the donor of Bar's pig valve. And we can thank the pig in public for the donation of this pig's relative's pig valve. I can't believe this, but I found a pig. I don't remember now how, But we found a pig. And so this pig comes out in front of 1,200 people at the theater here in Houston. And President Bush is in the middle of his thank you remarks. We're so grateful to this pig. And the pig defecates all over the stage. I have no idea why I chose to tell this story, but somehow it just seemed relevant. And before you ask your next question, one last thing. I will never, ever, talking about hearing Mrs. Bush's voice all the time, I will never forgive author Christopher Buckley, very close to the Bushes, worked for them in the VP years, truly one of the funniest people I know. About a week after Mrs. Bush died, Christopher Buckley emailed me and says, has it occurred to you yet that Barbara Bush now knows every single thing you do and think? He says, I can hardly get up in the morning. I'm so fearful of what she's thinking. I will never forgive him for pointing that out to me.
I love that story. Well, before I ask, I do have one last question. We'll let everyone go. If you purchase tickets to the event with Jeb Bush Sr., Governor Bush, and Jean Becker, we are again trying to reschedule that event for the fall when we get through the crazy. But if you would like your copy of Pearls of Wisdom, just call Midtown Reader and we can deliver it curbside or we can deliver it free of charge. We're very versatile these days. And again, we do have additional copies available. And Jean has kindly offered to sign some book plates for us in the interim. So just let us know at the store if you need that. I did want to hear from Jeb Jr. because I think a lot of people want to hear about this. Jeb, how is your family doing? How is the fabulous reader Georgia doing, who I constantly hear how she's reading so far above grade level from your dad and impossible to keep up with? And how is, Viv and Sandra and the family doing? And how are your mom and dad doing? And what are they up to these days?
Yeah, Georgia and Vivi are doing great. I think we're frequent purchasers of books from Midtown, so we're grateful for that. Mom and dad are doing great. I mean, we're all kind of sheltering in place, and we're fortunate that we're able to work from home and kind of stay on top of things. And dad's spending a lot of time with his education foundation, which maybe a shameless plug there in the Excel and Ed website. They're doing some classes with Condi Rice, and I think they've got Cardinal Dolan coming up next week, and Dana Perino was maybe filming today or tomorrow, but they're doing well, and we're all just very blessed and hanging in there.
Can you guys also give us the website for the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy as well, in case anybody would like to learn more?
Oh my gosh, I don't know it by heart because I have it on my favorite list.
Yeah, it's
I just Google Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy and it will pop right up. And I know that all the foundation people who are watching right now are about ready to kill me. But
Midtown Reader will post it on our website, so have no fear. We will make sure.
If you Google it, you'll find it. You'll definitely find it.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really, really grateful. We wish everybody good health and safety during this crazy time, and just really encourage all of our listeners to pick up your copy of Pearls of Wisdom. It will be well worth your time. Thank you guys so much. See everybody.
Thank you, Sally.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. This was fun. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Sally, thanks, Jean. Thanks, Jebby.
Bye, guys.